One, two, three.
TrueFire Live. Today we've got one of our buds, Ned Luberecki, in the house. Ned's here filming a couple of new courses. We'll fill you in on those in a minute. But for those of you that aren't familiar with Ned, and it's probably very few of you, Ned was named Banjo Player of 2018 by the International Bluegrass Music Association just last year. He's the man. Ned also hosts for Sirius Radio, I believe every Sunday, a show called Bluegrass Junction. He plays with the Becky Buller Band. He also plays with Stephen Mogan, another TrueFire artist, as Nedeski and Mojo. Ned has played with everybody and his brother. He's played, recorded, toured, whatever, with Chris Jones, Night Driver, Gary Ferguson Band, Flyer, Paul Atkins, the Borderline Band. The list goes on. Ned also happens to be, fortunately for all of us that are learning banjo or already play banjo, one of the very most sought after, most popular banjo instructors at all of the main, all of the big bluegrass banjo camps. We'll talk a little bit about that in a while as already. Now, Ned already has 2 TrueFire courses in the can. He's here, as I said, filming 2 more, 30 bluegrass banjo licks and bluegrass banjo backup. So let's see if we can interrupt his little bluegrass jam there and talk with Ned. Yo.
What do you know?
Perfect outro. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I couldn't be better. We love every time you come in. It's always fun. You're uber professional in the studio, so it's a breeze to work together. You always have your act together on the curriculum, and you're, just full of insight, The banjo players, I don't know if you've checked your ratings on TrueFire, but you're pretty much 5-star across the board.
Oh, man.
So that's pretty huge. And, and not surprising, right, given what you've done. I thought what we would do today, Ned, we've really only started working together. It's less than a year, I guess, right?
Yeah, It was I was looking at it. I didn't even think about it until I got down here and we looked at it. It was August the first time I came down, so it was.
Okay,
it hadn't even been a year.
Less than a year, right?
Yeah.
And many of our TrueFire students are already kind of hip to our, let's call it, mission and modus operandi here, which is, very rarely do we connect with an artist or an educator to do just a one-off course.
Right.
We always, there's only so much you can say in the context of one course. So do you remember our first meeting together? We said, we have to think 5 years out. What is your library going to look like 5 years out? And then what is it going to look like 100 years out, right? And you took that to heart, man. And, you kind of thought through a, let's say, logical approach to producing the series, right? So why don't we today take folks through a short trip for where we've been and where we are, and maybe even talk about some of the things we're going to do in the future. You up for that?
I am indeed. And actually, I also just wanted to say thank you to you and the folks at TrueFire for exactly being willing to take that approach. And I know that's the approach that you take with your artists is talking about not just doing a one-off and saying, here, just show us what you got and get it done, knowing that this whole thing is a journey. You can't teach everything there is to know about playing an instrument or even one style on an instrument in one or two things. So it is a catalog that you have to build to get those things off the ground. And I really appreciate the flexibility in being able to build this curriculum in that kind of way. So
well, that's
cool.
what we love about you, man. You kind of get it and drink the Kool-Aid with us. We started. Our first course was Bluegrass Banjo for beginners.
Right.
Do you remember that? It was way back in August.
In fact, we'll go back. We'll do the fade.
Okay.
Doodle.
And so, on the one hand, a logical place to start, but it's not always the first place that we start with an artist. But you felt it was kind of important because it laid the foundation for everything else that you were going to be teaching in the future,
Well, sure. I thought, obviously, if we're going to start a banjo curriculum, we got to start from the basics. We might as well start as a beginner, and I'm sure there are lots of folks who are tuning in that already know most of the basics. But if they peruse through this one and find some things maybe they hadn't picked up, but I did want to start it off with the idea that somebody who just picked up a banjo out of a box for the very first time and wanted to learn how to play it, that we could start right there. So we start off with the absolute basics: how to hold the banjo, what the strings are called, how to tune it, all those kinds of things. And then one thing that I think is a little bit unique about my approach to learning how to play the banjo, there are lots of banjo methods out there that you can find, different books and video courses and all like that, and a lot of them start in a very typical way. They start showing you some rolls, they show you how to do the right-hand picking patterns, and they show you how to play chords and say, play these rolls over these chords, and it starts to sound like something. But one thing that's usually lacking is I find that most people don't start by just showing you the melody of a song. And I know the first time I picked up a banjo and I was able to just play the open strings and go, that was kind of magic to me, just being able to hear a recognizable melody, and being able to play something like, because, everybody who picks up a banjo, they want to hear that. So my approach in the beginning is to, and this is to go along with all the regular stuff, like learning how to play rolls and some of the licks and all like that. But one of the things I start off with beginners right from the start is to pick out just the melody of a tune, as simple as can be, just to be able to play it just the same way they would sing it. And one of the examples that I used in the beginner's course was Jesse James. Jesse James is an old-time folk song. It's been done as a bluegrass song. It's been done as a bluegrass instrumental, and the melody's pretty simple, and it's pretty easy to play on the banjo on a lot of open strings. It's Jesse James was a man who shot many a man. He robbed the Glendale train. And that's just how we do it, is we pick it out one note at a time, playing it just the same kind of way that you would sing it. And that's another really important thing, I think, is that you need to be able to, when you're playing the melody to something on an instrument, you need to be able to phrase it just the same way that you would sing it, because that's how people recognize a melody. You can't just play the notes right in a row. You have to phrase it the same way that you would sing it. You have to use the same timing, and sometimes that means leaving a big space. It means leaving a big rest or a big pause in the melody. Then what we do on the banjo is we start to do a couple of fill-in things, So there's a little fill-in lick that you can do on the banjo that just requires playing 2 strings. And so I'll play the melody, and then maybe a little roll, and all those things are doing is filling in those spaces, where you would hold out a note if you were singing it. And I assemble the break to the song that way, assemble the solo to the song that way. So you get... And then right away, you've learned how to play the melody to a song, and you've started doing some fill-ins, and it's starting to sound like banjo playing. And I think that's, being able to grab a song that you can recognize and play something like that to it is a big key to success in learning how to play any instrument. If you can start to play something you can recognize, then you're having fun with it. Then you know that you're accomplishing something.
Well, not only well said, but we've got the testimonials that it works. Again, go read the comments underneath your courses on TrueFire, and you've got, 2 basic groups of students. You've got students that have never played banjo before, and, you get them up and running like right away. Which is incredible. But we have a lot of guitar players at TrueFire, and a lot of them, myself included, I've always wanted to learn how to play banjo, And, while, we know how to hold a neck and the concept of tuning is not foreign to us, we need to know what the tuning is. We need to know how to do some of the finger picking patterns. And so there are a lot of guitar players, some of them fairly advanced guitar players, that are also working with your beginner course to get up to speed on banjo. So that course, our first course, Bluegrass Banjo for Beginners. By the way, I see that they posted links. Anyone out there that's interested in learning more about Ned's first course here, just follow the link below the video. Further on in the course, you show us Cripple Creek. That's almost like a rite of passage, right? We've got to learn that song.
Oh, definitely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
and how you
sure.
get us going in there.
Cripple Creek is one of those songs that banjo players often start with. I read something from a famous banjo player one time who said something about he'd played Cripple Creek so many times he was sick of it, and I never have been. I still think it's a great tune. It's one of the tunes that Earl Scruggs did on his Foggy Mountain Banjo album. It's still one that gets played in jam sessions all the time, and I teach at a lot of music camps and things, and this is one that we'll do in the slow jam or the or in any jam, because it's one that everybody knows, and I still enjoy playing it. So if that just makes me simple, that's okay. I still like it. But it does incorporate a bunch of the really the fundamental banjo licks that you need to know how to do in Scruggs-style banjo playing and Bluegrass-style banjo playing. Maybe the biggest one is this slide here on the 3rd string. It's from the 2nd to 3rd fret, and this is actually in the 2nd part of Cripple Creek, and I kind of teach Cripple Creek that way. I teach it backwards. I do the 2nd part first, because the 2nd part, you play this slide, and the slide goes along with an alternating roll. So you're going 3, 2, 5, 1. And you do 3 of those in a row. So it's pretty simple. You just get that slide down and you go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 4th string. And then what's called a pinch, which is just playing the 1st and 5th strings together. So there you already have a quarter of the tune Cripple Creek by just playing that much. Then there's a slide pull-off hammer-on combo. Now, of course, a slide, everybody knows, is when you slide from one fret to the other. A pull-off is when you pull off from either a string, a fretted note to an open string, or from a fretted note to another fretted note, but it's where you're pulling your finger off. And so there's one of those in there. You do a slide, then a pull-off, then a hammer-on is, of course, when you play a note and drop your finger back down to produce a 2nd note. And really, other than playing a chord or playing a note, those are the 3 left-hand techniques that are kind of common to all string instruments. So once you have all 3 of those down, you really have the basics of everything else that's going to come. So you play the slide, pull off, hammer on, and another pinch, and that is half of Cripple Creek. That's the whole B part of the song. So it's easy to get it started, and then you play that whole part twice. move into the A part, which has just a couple other things. There's a big slide right there on the first string. You make a C chord. And once you've learned that, now you have all of Cripple Creek, because the follow-through from that is the same as the other part of the song. So the whole song, when you put it together, comes out like this. And that is, like you said, a rite of passage in banjo playing. You got to know that tune. And my goal in the beginning of Bluegrass Banjo video is to get you up to that speed, get you right there.
And indeed, you do just that, which is really cool. And thank you for doing that demonstration, because I think it shows off Ned's really extraordinary way of teaching in such an accessible way. Breaks it down, shows it to you slow, and then it's your job to work it up to speed, but you know the tune. And another interesting that you said, Ned, was, the banjo player said he's sick of playing Cripple Creek, And, we have a large blues guitar constituency here at TrueFire, right? Well, you're not going to go to a jam session without somebody playing Stormy Monday,
Sure,
or some Chicago Shuffle, or, it's basically the same tunes over and over and over again.
Oh, sure.
And I believe, in the world of banjo and bluegrass, there's a lot of jamming taking place, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of songs out there, and in the bluegrass world, we have our standards, our songs like Rocky Top and those kinds of things. And I know that it's one of those things where people will roll their eyes and say, "Oh, it's this one again." But you got to remember that those songs, the reason everybody likes them is they were great songs.
Right.
They were really cool. And yeah, when you get to a bluegrass jam, there's a bunch of standards, and they all have a lot in common.
And so it's almost like learning the vocabulary, the language of bluegrass, to be able to, everyone's at the jam, everyone's on the same page. Doesn't make it any less fun to play the standards, does it?
Right. Yeah.
So what a great segue into course number 2, which is Bluegrass Banjo Survival Guide, okay?
The Jam Session Survival Guide, right.
And let me just read through there are sections of lessons. You do a whole series of lessons on chord by numbers. I'll have you explain that in a second. Chord on, movable chords on the neck, chord groups, ear training, double stops, the ultimate forward roll. We'll get to that too. And then a few banjo licks. And basically, your objective, which I also think you overachieved, if anything, was to prepare a banjo player, even a late beginner, early intermediate player, to be able to get to that jam. And that's really where the action is and where the fun is. And to be able to survive a bluegrass, a banjo jam. So talk about chord by numbers, what you mean by that, why that's important to know.
All right, yeah, sure. When you're playing in a particular key, I mean, in banjo world, we're used to thinking in the key of G, because the banjo's tuned to a G chord. So we refer everything to the 3 chords that happen the most in the key of G: G, C, and D, right? I mean, everybody knows G, C, and D. Well, if you change the key, those 3 chords stay the same in relationship to each other, but you have to call them by a different name. So say you put your capo on at the 2nd fret. Now you're playing still G, C, and D positions, but they're coming out as different chords. They're coming out as A, D, and E, because you've changed the pitch. In a jam session, it's really likely that for a key like A, the banjo player may put a capo on to play in the key of A. Makes it a lot easier. The guitar player may decide to play it out of open A, because playing out of the A position on the guitar is actually pretty easy. The mandolin player generally won't use a capo, so he'll be playing out of A, and the bass player just playing out of open strings too. So rather than saying, okay, here's this song, it starts on the G chord, but actually it's not G, it's going to be A because I'm in a capo and you're not, that just takes too much time. So we call the chords by numbers, and they're numbered based on the note of the scale. So if I played a G scale and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The first note of that scale is G, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth note is C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, gives me D. So instead of calling them G, C, and D, I'll call them 1, 4, and 5. So if anybody doesn't know how that works, that's the basis for this. So there are a handful of chords that you really need to know for any bluegrass jam. And really, this probably goes for blues and rock and roll and a lot of different things. That 1, 4, and 5 chord progression is sort of universal. I mean, it fits so many different kinds of music. But there are a couple of other chords that come into play. You know, the 1, 4, 5, there's the 6 minor. So in the key of G, that's the E minor chord. There's the flat 7 chord, an F chord. That happens a lot. And there's the 2 minor chord. That would be the A minor chord in the key of G. And so if you have the 1, 4, 5, 6 minor, flat 7, and 2 minor, you've got most of everything that you need to play almost any bluegrass song. There are a handful of other chords that come in to play once in a while, but the percentage is pretty low as to how often they actually happen.
And you cover that pretty well when, chord by numbers, series of lessons. The movable chords gets you all over the place.
Now, the movable chord thing, I just want to touch on that for just a second, because the idea here is, now on the guitar, you would call movable chords, you'd call them bar chords, because you kind of play your finger straight across the neck, and then you make one shape or another, and then you can move that chord up and down the neck. Well, the banjo, we really only think of it as having 4 strings, so you don't really need to necessarily make bar chords. You're holding down all the strings all the time. But if you can find all the chord shapes, like this major chord shape, this major chord shape, this major chord shape, and then learn how to make them into minor chords, so that minor chord shape, this minor chord shape, and this minor chord shape, now I know every major chord and minor chord on the neck. The next step in all of this is to find those chord groups. So you take this chord shape for your 1 chord and find the closest 4 chord, which is the bar chord right there. The closest 5 chord is back down here. Then if I need the 6 minor, I can get it right here. If I need the 2 minor, it's right here, and the flat 7 there. So all of those chords that I need, 1, 4, 5, 6 minor, 2 minor, flat 7, they're all right in that little group. Now, if I make this as my 1 chord, I can go 1, 4, 5, 6 minor, 2 minor, flat 7. And if I learn how to make all those chord changes within these groups, then when it comes to playing in a jam session, whatever key that I happen to be in, if I can, that combined with the ear training, being able to understand what chord is being played when you hear it, I can make that chord change just almost immediately. I could just go right from the 1 to the 6 minor, right from the 1 to the flat 7, right from the 1 to the 2 minor, and it becomes automatic, and I don't even have to look. I mean, I'm so close in these old groups that I can just find them automatically like that. And that becomes really handy, not only for figuring out songs, but also for coming up with turning these positions into double stops and into licks and being able to play over those songs, even if you've never heard them before.
Show us some of those double stops you teach in this course.
So the double stops are really, they're just the first 2 strings of each one of those chord shapes. So if I find the G chord here at the 5th fret, and then I move up here to the G chord in the next inversion at the 7th, 8th, and 9th fret, and then I go up here to the G chord at the 12th fret, I'm just taking the first 2 strings of those shapes. So it's just those 2, those 2, those 2, and it continues on up the neck. So I can use those shapes to move around the neck anything I need in G. So once I've done that, and I can also figure out that from that double stop shape for G, if I need a C chord, I can just move 1 finger and get right there, because the C chord bar shape is right there, so G, C. And if I'm in that G double stop shape and I need a D chord, I can just move 1 finger back. So G, C, and D are that close to each other. Sometimes it's just a matter of moving 1 finger. If I'm at this G chord, G, C, D, again, all I had to move was 1 fret. Or I could be up here, G, C, D, G. And I can do that with all the other chords too. So G, flat 7, G, 2 minor, G, 6 minor. They're all right there within a couple of frets of each other. And I can use that to play. and find my way all around the neck.
There
Pretty
you
handy.
go.
And that is in the Jam Session Survival Guide.
Okay. Ultimate forward roll. We have to show that.
The ultimate forward roll. You've played forward rolls before, but have you ever played the ultimate forward? The idea here is there are a handful of rolls, the finger patterns that you play on the banjo, that happen all the time. You keep coming across the same ones. There's the alternating roll. The trouble with the alternating roll is if you try to start playing it fast and you're playing along with like a bluegrass jam, it tends to start sounding like a polka. You know, if you're doing Roll in My Sweet Baby's Arms, you're doing Roll in My Sweet Baby's Arms. You know, it doesn't really have that driving sound that I really want to hear out of a banjo. To me, the forward roll, this one, that's got that drive to it, you know, when you're moving that way. So a forward roll, most rolls, when we learn how to play rolls, we learn them as one measure. So it's just 8 notes. So I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then repeat it. But you can hear that starts to get a little jumpy. It starts to sound a little too repetitive. So this ultimate forward roll, and this is just the name that I've given it, is a forward roll with a little backward turnaround at the end. It makes it last 2 measures long, and it kind of breaks up the downbeat a little bit. Listen to it. It goes like this. It goes forward, and then turns around right at the end. So the count goes 1, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so it fools your ear into thinking that it's longer than it is. It also, the downbeat comes on a different note every time. If you listen, I'm going. So that also breaks it up. And if I play that along at the same tempo for a song like Rollin' in My Sweet Baby's Arms, I go, Rollin' in my sweet baby's arms, rollin' in my sweet baby's arms, lay round the shack till the train comes back. You get the idea. And it has that driving bluegrass sound. And I didn't do anything with my left hand except hold down a chord when the chords changed. And that's something that you can really get a lot of mileage out of in a jam session.
Now, show them how you put all these little techniques and approaches together. Because in this course, like your other courses, you'll teach something and then you have them apply it immediately playing a tune, right?
Oh, yeah,
Play
for
something.
sure.
Throw it all in there.
So this one is, let's just play this. This is one of the jam tracks. So it's just a guitar rhythm track, really, that gives a typical G, C, G, D chord progression. And I'll just play a couple of these position shifts, a couple of these little licks back and forth over that chord progression. So we'll start it off with just the ultimate forward roll, changing a couple of chords with that, and then I'll go through some of these double stop positions. So let's give that a try. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see, I'm not really doing anything with my left hand except playing a chord. And sometimes just one note. So the idea here is I'm starting on a G chord, just playing this roll, and going to a C chord wherever I happen to land. So if I'm on this G chord and my next chord is D, I just go to there. So G, go to another G, C, another C, G, G, D, D. And I'm just adding a roll to all that. Okay, that was a little further on. But that's sort of the next thing that we go into after you start to be able to navigate a chord progression like that, and just to be able. I usually think of that ultimate forward roll and those double stop positions. I think of them as treading water. You know, you've been thrown into a jam, you're thrown into the deep end of the pool, and you have to do something to keep your head above water. So you can do these things. You're playing along, you're keeping up with the rhythm of it. You can find the chords, you can keep along. You might not be playing the melody to the song, but you're certainly in time with the music, and you're certainly in key with the music. You're being able to change the chords at the right time. So then the next thing to do is to add a little flair to it, to put a couple of standard bluegrass licks to it. And there's a handful of those. And in the Jam Session Survival, I give you a couple of just sort of a taste of a few of them that are pretty standard, pretty easy to get into and out of. And you can use them to dress up something like that and start to make it sound more like bluegrass banjo playing.
Cool. So we have kind of the fundamental tools and approaches and some repertoire in bluegrass banjo for beginners. Then you give them the survival guide course to get them prepared to start jamming, which is where a lot of growth and a lot of fun takes place. Then you thought, you know, the next thing we should focus on is, you know, banjo players, like guitar players, spend most of their time playing rhythm or backup in banjo vernacular, right?
Right.
So you shot yesterday a course called Bluegrass Banjo Backup. Take a moment and talk about what is backup.
Right. And this is also important in that exactly what you said. You know, everybody, when they learn how to play the banjo, when they learn how to play the guitar, everybody wants to learn all the solos, wants to learn the cool stuff that you're doing. And then when you get to the jam, you get your one chance to play your solo, and then all the rest of the time you're playing something else. You're playing rhythm or you're playing backup. So on banjo, it's a little different than guitar in this regard. You don't usually play rhythm in the typical sense like you do on the guitar. On the guitar, when it's your turn not to be playing a solo, like an acoustic guitar, you're usually strumming. You're, you know, boom, chick, doing that kind of strum. Now, there's a lot more to rhythm guitar than just doing that. I mean, volumes can be written on just bluegrass rhythm guitar. In fact, my buddy Stephen Mogen did a course here of bluegrass rhythm styles that I still go through because there's stuff in there that I don't know. But when it comes to banjo playing, there are some basic rhythm things that you can do, and one of them is just this thing called vamping. It's a term that in other kinds of music might mean just holding on a chord or playing a little progression, but in the banjo world, vamping is to play this particular rhythm lick, which is to play this downbeat and a chop at the end of it. So it's like a boom, chuck rhythm. So I'm going boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck. So you're playing that two-part rhythm there. Sorry, my chord keeps getting messed up behind me there. I think I got it now. So you're playing this boom chuck rhythm. So you're playing the downbeat with your thumb, and then the rest of the vamp, you're playing the chord, but you're letting go of the chord. So you're muting the strings right afterwards. So you're going. So you're not just getting the full ringing sound. If you just went like this in a jam, you'd get kicked out pretty quick. So you want to be able to know how to do this and keep it nice and even. So from the basic chord positions of just doing that, moving it over your 1, 4, and 5 chord shapes, to the next step is to, if you were playing on the guitar, you might play an alternating bass pattern, you know, where you play like. On the banjo, you do that by shifting positions. So you move your vamp from one chord shape to the next one. So we start off with that in the backup banjo course. We just want to be able to do something really simple that to enable you to play along, to keep the rhythm. There's a fancier little lick that you could put into a vamping style. There's one where you put a little syncopation to the second chord. And we go through that. We give you some chances to play along. And then you get into what's known as playing fills. And this is where other musicians from other kinds of music beside the banjo and bluegrass would typically think of things that you would do in backup or in the background, and that is playing these little fill-in licks at the end of a phrase. If you hear somebody sing a phrase to a song, and then at the end there's a measure or two where they're not singing, waiting for the next chord change to come along, there are little fill-in licks that you might do. Some of them are pretty simple. One of them that I teach is the In the Mood lick. If you know the Glenn Miller tune In the Mood, it just goes. And that's a really simple one to get started with. So if you think about a G, C, and D chord progression, if I went, you can play some of those kinds of licks. And then from there, we go into some more fancier things that you can do. There's some Earl Scruggs licks that I teach, like this position shifting lick that's really a cool one. And you can really hear how swing influenced some of those things were. In fact, let me put some of these in context. I want to play these over that same G, C, D chord progression that we did. So just imagine somebody singing a song over top of this, and this is kind of what the banjo will be doing in the background. Let's hear that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's a handful of a couple of different things that we go over in the backup for bluegrass banjo. Some of that stuff is really fancy Scruggs style licks. Some of it is just plain vamping, and some of them are just built out of chord shapes that you already know. It's just a matter of knowing how to apply them in time.
Very cool. That is banjo backup. That's a very cool course. And, we were talking earlier about, guitar players like banjo players or banjo players like guitar players tend to spend most of their time practicing lead and soloing, even though they're playing rhythm or backup 95% of the time.
Right.
Few shout outs for you. You've got, fans all over the country here, all as far west as California chiming in right now.
Hey.
But you've got some bluegrass banjo fans in Italy.
Oh.
In Germany.
Yeah.
Tuned in right now. Transylvania.
I'll be in Germany in May and June teaching banjo at Banjo Camp Germany.
Make a note of that,
yeah,
man.
Bluegrass Camp Germany.
He'll be there. Transylvania. You're going to be out there anytime soon?
Wow, I don't think I'm going to be in Transylvania. But hey, book me and I will come.
And then and Poland. Have you ever toured Poland?
I've never been to Poland. I've been very, very close. I was in Brest, Belarus, but I never made it to Poland. So I was within a mile or two of the Polish border. And as a Luberecki, I wish that I could come there someday.
Are you of Polish descent?
I am indeed, Luberecki. Yeah.
Well, one of your fans here, Powell, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, thought so. He said, seems like Ned has got Polish roots. So,
Indeed.
Indeed. You've got to get to Poland, man, and do this thing. Right?
I would love to. One of these days, that is on my bucket list.
Maybe our buddy there in Poland can help set that up.
There it is.
Talk to the right folks. Ned will go, man.
Give me a coffee shop to pick in, and I'll bring the banjo and come do it.
There you go. So now let's talk about, and then we'll get to some more questions, but let's talk about the fourth course in the series. 30 bluegrass banjo licks you must know.
You
right?
must. You
and
must.
We do a lot of licks courses. It's a vocabulary course, really.
Right,
If you think about it. We all learn licks. We quote some of those licks exactly as, they've been played for whatever, hundreds of years, but we're all really good at kind of twisting and turning them and making them our own. I really like your approach to how you selected the collection of licks. Would you talk about how you went about doing that?
Yeah, I sure will. Well, and I was glad when I was going through the TrueFire catalog myself. I noticed, of course, that series that there are 30 licks for a bunch of different styles, and I thought, well, I knew right away that I really wanted to do one of those because, well, it's what everybody wants to learn. First of all, everybody's like, I need some new licks. You need to freshen up your vocabulary. But I got to thinking when I was selecting the licks that I wanted to do, there were a few real standard ones in there that I know that everybody probably knows or should know, but that I often hear performed poorly or just not played quite up to snuff. And what I'm talking about is there are a handful of these that are tricky. The techniques behind them are tricky. They might seem like they're pretty simple and they might seem like some basic licks, but sometimes there's a little finesse to them that people gloss over. And this, to me, is the difference in sound between the amateurs and the pros. When you hear a professional banjo player, let's take a great example of somebody like Jim Mills. Jim Mills plays all pretty straight ahead sounding banjo. He's not one of those players that's always pushing the boundary and coming up with bebop licks and things like that. He plays it pretty straight, pretty close to the vest bluegrass, but his execution on all those licks is perfect. It is just letter perfect. His pull-offs have the right snap. Everything he does just sounds really terrific. And so that's what I wanted to do with the first batch of licks in the 30 licks. And I'll give you an example of one that happens all the time. It's this little pull-off or hammer-on pull-off combination that happens. Earl Scruggs played it in the tune Down the Road. He went, and it's right in here. That lick. That one, I hear so many people get close, but they don't quite get it. So the lick itself, I'll show it to you right now, is a hammer-on the third string, second to third fret. And then the next one is a hammer-on pull-off. And you got to get that pull-off to get the sound in it. So many times I hear people play it and they go, and they kind of mute that sound. And you want, and there are people who overplay it. They think that the pull-off really it requires a lot of strength, and it's not so much strength as it is quickness. You want to get on and off of that string really quickly, and that's how you keep the string from dying. You keep the sound of it from dying. And there's also a little delay in the timing of it. It's not exactly square for the timing. There's a little bit of a swing. So you want to. So the second part of it comes a little bit late. It's almost like you're trying to catch up to yourself. It's little subtle things like that. And there's a couple other licks that I know. Another example of one is the up the neck position here where you play the tune Sally Gooden. There's a couple of tricks to that one. There's getting just the right amount of bend out of that little 11th fret lick. And the other one, this is another secret right here. I'm giving away the secrets already, Brad. Is that okay? I don't want to.
Totally all right.
All right. Here's one of the secrets. If you listen to the way Earl Scruggs played Sally Gooden, when he played that E note on the third string, you play that note and then you let it up. You don't hold it down. You don't hold this position the whole time. If I hold it, listen to it. You hear that note ringing? It's not the way it sounded when Earl played it. He played it. And the same with that note. You see, I'm actually lifting off between that note instead of letting it ring. So it's those little subtleties, some of those little subtleties that really make the difference. And I remember a guitar builder friend of mine, Paul Beard, was teaching me some of his little techniques of setting up an instrument, and he showed me how he files the nut just a certain way, and how he installs a certain set of screws just the right way, or he does a certain little thing like this. And every one of these things he showed me were just tiny little details. And I asked him, I said, Paul, really, how much of a difference does this little thing that you're doing when you file the nut, how much of a difference does that make? And he said, Ned, he said, he said, each one of these little details makes just a tiny bit of difference. He said, but if I do 100 of those tiny little things and make them all right, that becomes one big thing, And so that's the idea for part of this lick course. Is there a handful of licks in there that I just want to make sure you're playing right? Because if you pay attention to the details of the snap on that pull off, of getting that note to mute just right, if you can make those sound right, even without learning new licks, your sound is going to be better. It's better to sound good than to be good. And I hold to that. So if you can improve the way those things sound, it's automatically going to make you sound like a better player, and it's going to make you sound like you have better licks anyway. But then to fill in the rest of it, I thought, well, what we'll do is we'll go with some standard licks that make pretty good G, tag licks, fill-in licks, things that'll get you from one place to another. And we went over G licks, C licks, D licks. I even went over a couple that happened in different keys. So every now and again you're going to need a lick for the key of F. So we've got a couple of things in there that'll fit that. And I even came up with a couple that fit in no particular category. They're movable. You can go in different places. So, for example, here's one. It's based on sort of the Foggy Mountain, that hammer-on lick, and then a pull-off at the end of it. Now, I can do that in a couple of different locations on the neck and move it around to fit different chords. So let's take it to the key of A, for example. I'm going to do this hammer-on lick, so I'm hammering on. I'm playing the first two notes of an A chord, 2nd fret. So I'm doing that hammer-on the 2nd string. My 5th string's making it a nice A7th sound. I'm doing a pull-off, a hammer-on, and another pull-off. And you can hear where that gives you an interesting sounding lick in A that doesn't sound like the stuff you usually play. It's something a little bit different. Now, if I move it to a different key, I can move it up here to C. There I can do it. I can do it up here as F. I can do it in B flat. So as long as it's in a key relative to G somewhere where my 5th string will work, if I try it in a key like B, it's going to start to clash a little bit because I am using the open 5th string. But for A, B flat, C, F, even E, I could probably get away with that lick in a lot of different places. And it gives me something interesting to play when a chord comes from the outside like that. Like all of a sudden there's an A chord, and I thought, well, the A chord I always play is just this same thing over and over again. Well, here's something new that you can throw at it.
Well, you've got 30 gems in this collection, I'll tell you. And what we really liked, and, for sure students will like, is teaching them how to play a lick authentically, like what you've just shown. Also teaches them a technique that they can employ in their own licks that they compose themselves,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It's kind of like double bang for your buck, if you will. But clearly you stoke up their vocabulary with 30 gems, which they can string together, twist, modify, and start to play some decent solos at those bluegrass jams or on the stage,
Well, and that was the other part of the logic behind this, and believe me, there is some, is when the beginner course is a great one that stands on its own. It gets you started. It gets you moving. The jam session survival gets you into the deep end where you can start to be able to navigate your way through a standard chord progression and play some things over it. But then these other two courses really feed into each other. They feed into that one. So a lot of the techniques that happen in the jam session survival, you can also use those as backup So you can incorporate those into backup playing, and you can take a lot of the things that are shown in the Bluegrass backup and put those into the jam session survival. So they'll kind of mesh with each other. There's a lot in common. And then both of them, when you're ready to plug in a different lick, the 30 Bluegrass banjo licks that you must know, you can start to draw from that collection and just sort of, it's kind of modular. You can insert a few of those into what you've already learned in the other ones. And like we were talking, it is kind of designed that way. I did want one course to build off of the previous course and to give you some interchangeability so that you can borrow from one and plug in pieces from the other, and it all becomes banjo playing.
Yeah, it's a great learning system you put together, man. Let's. Would you mind rolling a few tracks and just playing some of those licks over those tracks?
Yeah, sure. Let's just roll a G track here, and I'll show you a couple of the licks that we're going to throw at you in the course. Here comes the G. So that's that first one that I talked about, where we're trying to get that happen. Here's another good G lick that comes up in the course, is this fill-in lick that Earl used in Doing My Time, where he goes, that lick again goes, yeah. That's a really good one. Here's one that's often misquoted and played wrong, is the old 10th fret choke lick that we do. That's one of them that we put in there. We got a couple of licks for C too. Let's run the C background for a second here, and I'll show you a couple of the things we did with that. I like this one as a melodic style. You can really hear some use for that one. Here's one of my favorites that I think I stole from Alan Mundy. He's the guy I remember playing it the most. It's over a C7, and it requires you hold the C chord shape a little different than you ordinarily would, and it goes. So that's another one that comes out. And then that movable lick that I showed you. So if I just incorporate those along with like the double stops, and the ultimate forward roll. So there's another one. So all that stuff are just a few of the licks that we did from the 30 licks course, with the ultimate forward roll in between, and then really just those double stops moving up and down over a C chord. And that was without even changing chords.
Beautiful. So there you go. In less than an hour, we gave them a grand tour, a quick tour, but a really good tour of all 4 courses in the series thus far. What are we going to do next?
Oh, you know what else we had to do? I had to do some ending licks. So I had to get the old... Had to put the shave and a haircut on.
There you
so
go.
I got those in there too. Got a couple of different versions of the shave and a haircut, and yeah, so you'll be able to learn at least 2 versions of
mandatory. You've got to have that,
it's
otherwise there's
yeah.
no end to the jam, right?
I used to teach music lessons at this store. And one of the guys at the store wasn't a bluegrass guy at all, but he told me that some of my banjo students would come in and try out the banjos in the store, you know, when they were waiting for the lesson. And he told me, he said, some of your guys they're pretty good. I said, well, thanks. You know, I'm proud of them. They're doing a good job. And he said, but I got to ask you something. He said, they all play those banjo tunes, and at the end, he said, does every one of them always have to end doot 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 doot? And I just looked at him and said, yeah. That's how you know they're over. Shaving a haircut, man, that'll stop a train. You put that on the end, it's done.
No doubt it's over, right?
It's like the old joke, why do banjo tunes have different names?
Yeah.
So you can tell them apart. All right, sorry. No banjo jokes.
No banjo jokes. All right, so we just have a few minutes left, but everyone
Is anybody
always...
hanging out with us?
Who?
Is anybody hanging out with us there? Does anybody have a question or a comment?
They're hanging. You have a lot of fans, I'll tell you that.
Hey, well, hi everybody.
This is really incredible. Many of them love your Sunday show.
Oh,
tons
yay.
of fans. He says alternate endings would be cool. Ned, do you use harmonica?
Oh, harmonics? Is he talking about harmonics?
Harmonics, sorry.
Yeah. All right, here's a freebie for you.
Yeah.
Check this one out. This is harmonics you can use on an ending. You play the shave and the haircut.
Yeah.
So for the last two notes, the F sharp and G, you can get the F sharp note on the second string, 19th fret harmonic, and you can get the G note here at the fifth string at the 17th fret.
Yeah.
Now, I will admit to you that when I first figured out how to do that, for about the first year, I played... It sounded a lot like that. So it took a little while before I could hit them really, really smooth like that. But if you want to get those harmonics to come out and pop really, really just right, and even if you're using the harmonics across the neck like you're playing Bugle Call Rag or one of those songs, one of the tricks that I have found is instead of just laying your finger down across the string, where certain strings come out a little sharper than others, some of them end up getting a little too dull, I'll actually move my finger across and then touch the string and bounce right back off of it. And you get a nice loud sound out of it that way. So if you watch my left hand, I'm not staying on it. I'm not doing that. I'm hitting the string. It's almost like I'm tapping it the same time I'm picking it. And you get a nice clear harmonic out of that, and that'll give you harmonics for the 2 bits. You can get the same harmonics here, but they're not quite as strong. I like those better.
Cool. Bonus lesson, right?
Bonus lesson right there.
Maybe
Free.
a whole future course. You never know. Embellishments, special effects. Sweet.
Yep, that one. If I were better at that, I would teach a lesson on that. But that's what people call artificial harmonics. They're not actually artificial at all, but all it is, and it's something that dobro players do a lot. I know some guitar players that are really good at it. Steel guitar players do this, and they really know how to rock it. And all that you're doing, it's just like playing harmonics across the 12th fret, like everybody usually does. But if I hold a C chord down, I just have to trace the outline of a C chord 12 frets up. So instead of playing the harmonic here at the 12th fret, I have to play it up the 14th because I've fretted it 2 frets high. And the way I do it is I use my ring finger because it doesn't have a pick on it. And I lay the finger down just over that harmonic and then pick it with the thumb pick back here. It's just, you really have to know where you're going, and you have to hold nice and steady, because if your banjo wobbles at all, you get really off key on that. And like I said, I know some guitar players who are super good at doing that. I don't do it that often, so I'm not as fast on it as I could be.
But you're working on it, looks like, huh?
Oh, I could. One of these days, I'm going to play up Foggy Mountain Breakdown all in harmonics, man. You won't believe it. You won't believe your ears.
Tell them about the banjo you're playing.
Oh, the banjo I've got with me today. Yeah. This is my main axe. This is a 1937 Gibson Style 7, and the reason I say Style 7, it would technically be an RB7. For anybody that doesn't know banjo nomenclature all that much. The first 2 letters in the banjo names, RB, TB, GB, things like that. The RB stood for regular banjo, which meant the 5-string banjo. TB was a tenor banjo. PB was a plectrum banjo, which was another 4-string banjo. This banjo started its life as a tenor banjo, so it was a 4-string, had a short 4-string neck on it. It's really common for for old pre-war Gibson banjos like this one to have been more of them were 4-string banjos. The 5 strings were very, very rare because the 4-string banjo was more popular back in those days. So it's really common to just replace the neck. Now, the necks on banjos are just bolted on, so it's pretty easy to change one, and it's really common to find an old classic instrument like this and then have a 5-string neck built for it. The tenor neck, which I have, looks just like this, has the same inlay pattern and like this. Robin Smith in Nashville, Tennessee built this neck. The rest of the banjo, though, is a 1937 style 7 banjo. It's a flathead tone ring Gibson flathead banjo. It's maple. The top tension, the style 7 was what's known as a top tension banjo. So anybody that's looking at it and says, why does that look different than most banjos I've seen? In the early days of banjos back in the 20s and 30s, the head on the banjos, instead of being made out of plastic like they are now, was made out of calfskin or some kind of animal skin, and they would change depending on the temperature and the humidity. If it got really humid, the head would sort of get loose and tubby sounding, and if it got really dry, it would get really tight and sometimes break. And so it meant that banjo players were constantly having to adjust the tension of their banjo head, and in order to do that, you had to take the resonator off and go back inside and adjust all those little nuts. In 1937, Gibson came out with this idea where you could adjust the banjo head from the outside, that you could just put this little key in there and adjust the tension of the head. Nowadays, it's less of a concern because I haven't adjusted the tension on this banjo head really since I've had it. The plastic heads are pretty stable, but they do have a tendency to sound a little different than some of the other ones. There's a little more mass because of the brass tension hoop. There's also the resonators are made out of solid maple, so it's really pretty thick in the middle. They're a little heavier than a standard master tone banjo. And the other thing about the style 7 and the top tensions is they were always flathead tone rings. The tone ring is what sits right under the banjo head, and the flatheads were really the most rare of the kinds of banjos that were out there, and so they're kind of the most desirable and the most sought after, and consequently the most expensive too. But this is a banjo that I've had for a few years now, and it was one that I went to a vintage instrument dealer there in Nashville, Carter's Vintage Guitars. I was in there actually to see some friends were playing there, and I saw that they had this selection of banjos back there, and I asked if I could see them. And I played a number of really priceless, amazing banjos, and including this one. And when I played this one, I just had that oh crap moment. I just played it and I just went, and my heart sunk, and I went, oh no, how am I going to tell my wife?
Oh man,
honey, I'm sorry, I emptied the bank account today.
I know. We all have those moments. It's wonderful though, isn't it?
Well, it was it, and I've had people ask this, and I'm in no way saying that this is the best banjo in the world, but for me, this is the best banjo in the world. It's everybody. There's a sound that everybody's looking for in a particular instrument, and I'm really, really lucky that I have found it in this one. To me, when I play this banjo, it does everything I want it to do. I really couldn't be happier with the way it suits me for my style of playing. And like I said, I've played other instruments that would be, because of collectability and other things, more valuable. Other banjos that were louder or had a better tone for something, but to suit my style, to suit my playing style, I've been really lucky in being able to have this one. I'm pretty tickled with how it works.
Well, I think everybody agrees, including Astro, who says beautiful top tension, sounds like a dream.
Thank you.
You would agree, right?
I'm there, man. I'm very grateful. I'm lucky that we found each other. My soulmate.
One last question, also from Astro. Any tips on learning the walk down on Earl's Breakdown?
Oh! That's it right there. Just do that. I always call that the falling down the stairs lick. Doesn't it sound like you're...
Yeah.
It feels like you're going to fall off the edge.
It sure does.
My tip for learning how to do that, and I in fact, I did this for one of my students really recently. You can find that lick tabbed out in the Earl Scruggs book, and there's lots of places you can find it. But I took the original recording that Earl did, and I used one of those programs that'll allow you, first of all, Earl Scruggs was slightly out of tune when he played that song. They used to tune up about a fret sharp. You know, they would go up about a half step. So I took one of those transcribing programs, and I pitch corrected it, so I brought it back down to G, and then brought it into lowered the speed of it by, I don't know, I made it like 70% of normal speed, and just looped it, played it over and over again until I knew that I had it exactly like it was. But it kind of makes sense after a while. It just goes down chromatically. So once you play that part, you go, and then you're right there. It just goes straight on down, one fret at a time. No more trick to it than that. Yeah, the only tip, play it over and over and over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah, and you believe in the notion of, slow it down, learn it at a tempo where you can really nail it, and then work the speed up, right?
Yep. Yeah. Once you have it, and that's the other thing that I can remember from my own self in trying to learn how to play certain licks or songs or whatever it was, is I would get to a thing that I wanted to learn like that, and then I would play it, and I'd get it wrong, and I'd play it and get it wrong, play it and get it wrong, and finally I'd get it right. Out of 10 tries, I'd get it right, and I'd think, oh, I got it. Well, no, I got it 1 out of 10. I don't got it. I got it right once. I need to be able to play it 10 times and not mess it up. One of the things I always do with my students at home when I'm teaching them a new lick is I'll teach them something and I'll have them play it back for me, and sometimes I'll play rhythm guitar for them, or I'll do that. But my own key, just for myself, and I don't know what happened to how this magic number came in, I want to hear them play it 3 times in a row. I want to hear them get it right 3 times. If I feel like if somebody can play it 3 times in a row, then they know what it is. Now, they might not have it yet. They might not be really good at it, but if I can show it to them and they can repeat it 3 times in a row, then I know that they know what it sounds like and what they have to work on. So that's the goal that I go for when I'm showing it. But then in order to really have it, yeah, you got to do it slowly and over and over and over.
Yeah, and we certainly subscribe to that. All of Ned's courses, all of Ned's video courses here on TrueFire have our video sync feature where they can loop any one of those licks, loop anything that you've done in the courses, any section, a measure, a half a measure, a whole chorus, slow it down to 50%, keep the pitch, and then work it up to speed. So, we support that, that
and that's
approach.
so handy to be able to do that with the video on there. I mean, just to be exactly what you said, to be able to highlight just the section that you need, loop it, and be able to slow it down. Man, that is such a cool
and reference
feature.
the tab and the notation and the video. Wish I had that when I was learning.
Man, no kidding.
Right? I think that explains why, there's so many incredible young players today. The amount of information that's available on sites like TrueFire and software like what we have, and there's many other great companies out there, and the learning tools available to them.
Oh, sure. And I mean, even with all those learning tools, the desire's got to be there. I mean, even with all the greatest tools in the world, you've got to want to do it, and then you still got to put in the work. So
the 10,000 hours.
Yeah, we don't want to make you think that you just buy this course and sleep with it under your pillow and you're going to be able to do it.
That's right.
But we do want to. We do. This is the next best thing to sitting in a room with me or any other instructor and having me do it for you really slowly over and over again and say, now let's play it again. Now let's play it again. The only thing that's lacking here is I can't just make you keep going. I can't just say, no, do it again. Do it again.
Get in your room
do it
and
again.
do that.
Do it again.
Yeah.
So you have to just hear me in your head saying, no, one more time. All right, one more time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it one more time.
Yeah.
You have to just keep that in your head. But other than that, this is as close as I can get to doing it without having you be in the room with me.
Man, thank you for carving out the time. I know you've got to finish the second project.
Yeah, we're still
You've got
we're
a
still
photo
cooking here.
shoot shortly, too. We want to keep you looking pretty for that, right? You got a bunch of stuff coming up. You're playing with Becky Buller Band,
Right,
touring,
yeah.
right?
We've got coming up really shortly, actually, in the beginning of April, first weekend in April, 4th, 5th, and 6th. I'm going to be in Nauvoo, Alabama, at the Alabama Folk School, teaching banjo out there. So if anybody's in that area, you can look that up. I'm going to be a little later on in April, the 11th, 12th, 13th. Let's see, I wrote some of these down. We've got a tour with the Becky Buller Band. We're going to be in Bristol, Tennessee on April 11th. Pennyroyal Opera House in Ohio. I've been there many, many times with a lot of different folks. That's on April 12th. Really looking forward to getting back out there. The Holly Inn in Mount Holly Springs, Pennsylvania. We've played there a few times. That's always a fun place. That's on the 13th. And the 14th at Frying Pan Park in Virginia, Herndon, Virginia, right at the end of the runway at Dulles Airport. So it's right there. And then April 25th, 26th, 27th is a brand new one. It's a banjo camp that Bill Evans is spearheading. This will be the first one. We did one last year in California, and he's moved the location to New Mexico. It's an absolutely beautiful location, and it's called the New Mexico Banjo Camp. And April 25th, 26th, 27th, Bill Evans, me, Alan Mundy, and Riley Bogus on Old Time Banjo.
Wow.
That's going to be a really fun time, and one of the most beautiful places in the world. So.
Get to one of those camps.
Yeah.
You do great camp. You're really.
It's
you're
always
amazing.
a good time. Even if you don't learn anything, you'll have a good time.
For sure. And tune in. I love your radio show on Sirius. I think it's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
So
Sirius
tell them
XM.
the times.
Yeah, Bluegrass Junction, Channel 62. I have the Derailed Show Saturday nights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And then I'm on every Sunday from 2 to 6 Eastern Time with More Banjo Sunday, where I play the banjo on the air and do a banjo lesson. So I know there's a few of you guys that listen to that. So thank you, everybody that listens to that all the time. Here's a really scary thing. I started doing that really just as a way of saying, well, this will be interesting. Maybe somebody will find this to be fun. And that has been 10 years ago at least, but I've had at least half a dozen people come up to me and tell me that they've started playing banjo because I was doing that Sunday banjo lesson on the radio, and that's a thing I never expected. I just think I'm some schmo in a room talking into a microphone by myself, but to think that you have that kind of effect, and then I was really gratified by that because I do think that playing the banjo, I mean, obviously I think it's fun. I've devoted my life to doing it, and I think if other people want to get into it, if I can inspire that, man, that's great. So to anybody that tunes into that and thinks, we always made it sound like it's pretty easy. Well, it can be. It really can be pretty easy to get started on the banjo, and I hope you'll take the leap and give it a shot.
Well, they'll be joining thousands of others that have taken the leap with you, and you're just an incredible instructor and just a great all-around human being to hang with and collaborate with. So thank you for, believing in us and allowing us to, bring this out in all these digital manifestations,
Thanks for having me down. And hey, man, lunch was fantastic too. So thanks for feeding me well.
Of course, we do feed well down here, don't we? So pick any tune you want and play us out.
All right, here we go. I'll play a little Lonesome Road Blues as we head down the Lonesome Road. So...